Have you ever looked in the mirror and as you're putting your clothes on, something just didn't feel right? Maybe your legs look shorter than they should, or your shoulders weren't as commanding as you expected. Or maybe you're just putting on clothes and you're not feeling as confident as you should when you step out. And you've asked yourself the question, why do some men command attention when they step into a room and I don't? Well, hundreds of clients who have worked with me have asked me this same question, and they've thought that if they go to the gym, they start working out, building some muscle, losing some weight, that they will alleviate this feeling. But a six pack doesn't change the fact that your clothing actually affects your perception and the perception of others, at least until you take it off. The truth is that style isn't just about clothes. It's about how your torso and your leg line relate vertically, and how your shoulders, your hips, and your waist relate horizontally, and how your silhouette can reinforce or disrupt your natural proportions. So today, we're going to be breaking down how scale, your height, and your proportion affect your perception and the perception of others, how they work together, and how art holds a secret to dressing well. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a simple formula to find the perfect proportions for your body. So let's step into a dressing room. Have you ever Googled any one of these questions because you didn't know how to fix the problem and you were too hesitant to ask somebody for help? Well, I can tell you, you're not the only one. Professionals, executives, even speakers are asking me these questions in private because they understand that their clothes are going to shape the perception of those around them, both professionally and socially. And the Journal of Nonverbal Behavior found that symmetrical proportions in clothing create an immediate perception of competence, strength, and confidence. On the flip side, when clothing is off balance, it subconsciously will signal awkwardness or instability, both that a professional can't afford in his social or professional life. So if you optimize your proportions and your scale, you instantly command more presence. Which begs the question, why does the human brain instinctively find some bodies more assertive, powerful, and authoritarian than others? Well, I think that it comes down to somebody that we're relatively familiar with, Leonardo da Vinci. His creation and depiction of the Vitruvian man breaks down the golden ratio or the Fibonacci sequence, illustrating the ideal symmetry of the human form. So the torso to leg ratio affects the height perception, and the shoulder to waist ratio affects the weight distribution. So you have vertical balance and horizontal balance. And ideally, we want our clothing to reflect that natural balance. And the tailoring that we pay attention to and that we utilize will help create the best proportions and create the perception of that natural balance. And the reason why this is so important is because studies in evolutionary psychology actually suggest that balanced proportions, such as torso to leg ratio and your shoulder to hip ratio, are universally associated with health and vitality. So you can look healthier, more vibrant, and attractive without having to pick up a single weight. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a benefit to me. But what if you've been putting that work in to the gym and you're starting to see gains and you're turning into that Vitruvian man naturally? But every time you put on your clothing, it still doesn't fit. Well, then you start to ask the question, is it my body or is it my clothing that is actually the problem? And what could be even more concerning, is it the person who is dressing me that is the potential problem? And part of the reason why we have these issues, especially when it comes to fit, is because most men in the menswear industry really don't have an understanding of the body. And that actually is the first step to really dressing well. The human body is naturally asymmetrical, but your clothing should compensate for that. So now let's discuss a few common body issues, right? And again, remember that everybody is dealing with these elements. So the first thing that you want to think about is your posture. Now, according to a study at Carney, adopting an upright posture is associated with increased levels of testosterone and reduced cortisol, that stress hormone, and it's also directly related to enhanced confidence. But a slouch posture, on the other hand, is associated with lower energy and a diminished perception of authority. However, we find ourselves in these positions oftentimes over a computer or because we are sitting down. So if you have an erect posture, your head is usually going to lean back and your hips and your chest are going to push forward. If you do this, your jacket is probably pulling up in the front and will often need lengthening, even if it's slightly. However, if you stoop, then your head is going to lean forward and your jacket's back panel is actually going to go up because it's off balance and it will need extra length in the back to prevent it from riding up. Psychological research highlights that well-tailored garments will often emphasize the shoulder line and will significantly improve leadership qualities. Now, we used to see this heavily in the 80s and the 90s, but we've now gone to a more natural shoulder line. And since we've gone more to a natural shoulder that is associated with being a little bit more casual, we've lost a bit of the masculine and authoritarian component that comes with a structured shoulder. It's actually been studied by sociologists. So, if you have sloped shoulders, much like myself, you may need extra padding to prevent the droopy shoulder effect. And even recently, with me wearing a natural shoulder line, I've noticed that when I wear my more padded shoulders, I feel and look more confident. Now, if you have square shoulders, you need less padding because you don't want to look like a football player. So remember that your shoulders are going to be a power signal. Make sure that they are balanced and built up. Speaking of shoulders, how do we then create a feeling of symmetry and strength, even if we are working on our own? Well, now we want to start paying attention to these horizontal elements of our body, which is going to be composed of our shoulders, our chest, our waist, and our seat. And we want to make sure that everything is balanced together in those spaces. So if you have broad shoulders but a narrow waist, then you want to enhance the structure of your shoulders and give that outline of your waist by tailoring it without it being too tight where the button is pulling on your jacket or your shirt. If you have narrow shoulders and a wider waist, you want to use some more structure and a heavier fabric that's going to allow for better lines. If you have a bigger barrel chest and a narrow waist, well, now you want to make sure that you're paying attention to not overly emphasizing your chest, so giving yourself a little bit more fabric and paying attention to your button placement on your jackets and making sure that you're giving yourself enough fabric on your shirts so that they fit you properly and don't look skin tight. If you are a guy who has a more concave chest or a chest that is starting to indent, then you want to give yourself a little bit more volume in the chest. And so you want to make sure that your chest is tailored properly so that it looks like you have a broader chest, but that you're not overly emphasizing the chest to the point that it looks like you have your big brother's jacket on. And this can be a challenging dynamic. I had a client who was 5'6", all of 110 pounds, very, very thin guy. And we had to make sure that his chest looked fuller. And when we tailored it properly, it actually gave him about 10 pounds and made him look much more prominent in the chest area. So now we have your shoulders, your chest, and your waist in alignment. We've taken care of the upper half. Now we need to take care of the lower half. And interestingly enough, fitting for pants and finding the right proportions for them can be a very challenging thing. Probably one of the most challenging things for the fellas. As I've said, your pants are your center of attention. So if you are a person who is not paying attention here, you could end up looking a little crazy in these tutorial streets. So if you are a guy who has a prominent seat, but you have a small waist, then you're going to require trousers that are going to give you more room in the seat, the rise, and the thigh so that the pant can hang straight down. And you're going to want to contour the waistband so that it shapes your waist properly, but still gives you enough room to move. If you're a guy who has a flat seat, you know that Neanderthal disease, some of you guys have it, it's cool. Then you want to make sure that you are taking care of your rise, because if you don't, you're going to have the diaper booty effect, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants to see it or experience that. So correcting these elements of your horizontal physique on your upper and your lower half are going to immediately create that balance as well as the confidence that will allow you to interact with others. But for some of you guys, maybe you want to make sure that you are balancing out your height. If you're a little bit shorter, you want to look taller. And if you're a little bit taller, you want to make sure that you're not looking like a string bean. So if that's the case, ask yourself this. Why do some men who are 5'6", 5'7", look taller when you see them approaching, and some guys who are actually taller look shorter and frumpier when they're approaching? Well, this is often because guys don't have an understanding of their vertical balance. And if you can master this, then you're always going to look more assertive and more prominent when you are stepping out. Now, there's this common misconception that when you are thinking about your clothing, that you should just split yourself in half and focus on 50-50 of the vertical. But you don't want to do that because it is going to look disproportionate. Instead, you want to follow the rule of thirds, which is going to create a harmonious and powerful look. So in the formula that we're going to talk about in a minute, we'll start to break some of this down. But essentially, I just want you to understand that if you have a short torso, like myself, and long legs, then we want to make our torso look a little bit longer so that our legs are balanced. Now, if you want to do this with your jacket, the first thing that you want to think about is having a longer coat. Now, the misconception here is that the longer coat is going to look like a 90s Armani ad. That's not necessarily the case. Your goal isn't to make it look super long. You just want to cover your seat and maybe about an inch longer so that it gives the impression that your legs are being cut and will make you look like you have a longer torso line. This can be done with a longer coat, but if you really want to enhance the overall look, you want to pay attention to the button placement as well. Typically, you want to have this button at your natural waist, but for a guy with a short torso, he needs to extend that button line just slightly so that it's buttoning right at his navel or just below it. You can really only do this when you're having your jackets made by an experienced tailor, but the closer that you can find jackets that fit for you, the better. And when it comes to your pants, it's often recommended that you have a lower rise on your garments. You'll see me contradicting this because I just tend to like my pants up around my natural waistline. But because I often wear double-breasted jackets, you don't really see my waistline. Or because I wear vest when I am wearing a single-breasted jacket, there is a opportunity for me to create some other visual distractions, if you will, that we'll talk about in a future video. Now, if you're a person who has a longer torso, then our goal is to give you some of that leg line by shortening your jacket. And again, if we're going to shorten your jacket, then we want to pay attention to that button placement and where we're putting it so that it doesn't look like you have your little brother's jacket on. But we also want to make sure that you're wearing higher waisted trousers that are going to accentuate that leg line and make you look longer. This will also rebalance your proportions. So you started to see that there are all these different elements that you need to pay attention to: your horizontal, your vertical, the balance of these different elements of your body in order to create the best visual representation for you. And this is why a lot of guys enjoyed wearing suits in the past, because there were all these things that they could wear to enhance their visual representation. And you can still do the same thing in a casual manner, applying these same concepts. But this is also why a lot of salesmen and clothiers can't really dress a guy well. It's because they don't have this basic understanding of anatomy. And the more that you can make yourself aware of this, the more you can help a clothier. Or if you're in the business, you'll find that you are providing a better experience for those people who want to look and feel their best. So now you have a basic understanding of the balance that you need to pay attention to. But I promised you at the beginning of this video that you would have a formula that you could utilize to help yourself understand your overall look. And I'm not going to hold you. I'm not good at math or formulas. So I had to ask ChatGPT to help me out. And it came up with this interesting formula. And that is P is equal to 1/3 T plus 2/3 L plus S with the ratio of W. Now, if you're asking what these letters stand for, what you have to solve for, P is the presence, right? Presentation, or your proportions. Either one of those. 1/3 your torso length plus 2/3 of your leg length plus your shoulder to waist ratio. So if you have these numbers, then you will have a understanding of your proportions. All right, let's put this into a real world example so we have a better understanding of what we're looking for. Let's say you're a guy who is 5'10" and you have a torso length. Now you want to measure from your neck all the way to your waist, just above your hip bone. And then you have a 35-inch leg length or outseam, and you want to measure this from your waist, your natural waist, right, just below your belly button to the floor. And let's say you have a shoulder width of 18 inches, point to point, and a waist width of 32 inches. Well, if you do both of these, you'll start to find that you are already increasing your image and your impact when you're stepping out and creating an even more dynamic statement with your style. The dope thing is, you haven't spent any money on clothing yet, and you're automatically more attractive, assertive, and authoritative with your look. But that's not the only element that you have to pay attention to. See, we can see this silhouette as well as this one, and we don't even need to have any further detail to find the association with that image. And the same thing is true when it comes to our body type. Paying attention to your proportions is one thing, but paying attention to your silhouettes is something else. And we determine this by understanding your shape. So make sure you check out the next video where we're going to be talking about the shapes of men and how your silhouette can make or break your presentation when you are building on your style.